From the rolling hills of the Bluegrass State, this is the Breakdown Paranormal Files. I am your host, Aaron Barker, your guide on this foray into the unknown, the unexplored, the curious, the macabre, the creepy, and sometimes downright scary cosmos, asking the questions that get you kicked out of Bible study and sent to therapy. Right over here on Odyssey Radio, ODYSYradio.com. If you want to listen to this and other fantastic paranormal shows, head on over there, and you will be able to download the app and take it with you wherever you go. Tonight's show is a fascinating foray. As a matter of fact, I heard this guest on another show talking about a topic, honestly, that I've talked about quite a bit. If you listen to the breakdown, either here on the Paranormal Files or on Saturdays on Mojo 50 at 9 a.m. live, we've talked about this before. Brian and Erica and I have over there regarding the Disney and not just Disney, but the occultic and satanic ritual abuse that occurs within programs, television programs. There's a reason they call them programs. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight with our guest, Cosmic Peach. Cosmic Peach, Julia, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm always interested in learning other people's perspectives on this. I've heard you talk about this stuff before, but if you wouldn't mind, give the audience a bit of an introduction about yourself and what your mission, your goal is.
Yes, thank you. So I have the Cosmic Peach podcast, and it's available wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever, and even on YouTube. What I really focus on is bringing the truth out behind a lot of the quote unquote programs that we grew up watching or movies we grew up watching, and we never noticed, or maybe we didn't realize how obvious some of the symbolism is. And that's what I do on my podcast is I break down shows, I break down movies, I even go as far as musical artists, or sometimes I do old world architecture, but that's what I'm about is bringing the truth to regular everyday people in a way that they can understand it and it makes sense to them about how we are being programmed to think more like Satan and less like Christ.
See, that's crazy to hear that. A lot of people will hear that and they'll be like, oh, it's just a TV show. It's just this. But you're saying that the programming that we see is specifically trying to desensitize it. I might be putting words in your mouth, but desensitize us to Christ and open our eyes to or turn us on to satanic beliefs or even worshiping Satan.
Yes, I think so, because it's been a slow drip. You know, it's never used to be acceptable in the 1920s to watch the kind of things we watch today. And if you look at our parents or our grandparents, if they were Christians, in every generation, someone will say, these are the end of days. Look at all this stuff on TV and listen to the music these kids are listening to. And they were talking about Elvis, and then they were talking about Madonna. But look what we have now. Can it get any worse is the real question. I mean, Sam Smith at the Grammys can answer that question really quick.
Yeah, so that now, of course, I'd love to talk to you about that too, because we had the what I thought was the tame Super Bowl party or the Super Bowl halftime show this year, but we can talk about that in a minute. So let's back up a second, because a lot of people hear this and they'll be like, are you serious? Disney is a kids program? Because I remember growing up, I grew up in the the 80s and 90s. 90s was pretty much my generation. And there was the Smurfs, He-Man, the Care Bears, and I'm trying to think of some other ones right off the top of my head, but those are the main ones that had the big problems as far as the occult were concerned, and the New Age mysticism, which was really coming to light back then. But people will look at this and they'll be like, well, those are just harmless cartoons, right? You know, Saturday morning cartoons, we love them, they're great, we don't have to worry. So where is it that so how can you explain that? If somebody were looking at you saying, I think you're a little off on this, what would you say to be like, well, let's talk about this. Let's just give you a programming 101 here.
Okay. I would probably start with Mickey Mouse, and a lot of people have decorated their homes and kitchens or whatever with Mickey Mouse. It's
Yeah.
pretty iconic, you know. But Mickey Mouse, if you watch some of those old ads with Mickey Mouse and some of the old cartoons with Mickey Mouse, it's very covertly sexual in a lot of ways. Some of the gestures and the mannerisms of Mickey and where he got his name, I think it was supposed to be like Mac at one point after a famous serial killer, but then
Oh,
they
really?
changed it to Mickey. And Walt Disney himself was very obsessed with these occult secret societies. And he was looking for an outlet, how he could get this message to more people on a wider scale. And now we have Disney everywhere shoved down our throats. And Walt Disney was also a longtime friends with someone named Warner von Braun, who was a Nazi who
Hmm.
came over to America in the Project Paperclip, where we took a bunch of the German Nazi doctors and scientists and brought them here so they could continue their work. And Warner von Braun was responsible with starting the NASA cults.
Yeah.
So he was hanging out with Walt Disney all the time. If you want to say I'm stretching, that's fine, but I just don't see what the connection would be. Is like, oh, I make children's cartoons, I make space shuttles. Of course, we're best friends.
Yeah.
You know, you have to look at what these people were involved in that got us to where we are today. There's a lot of a space push with Disney, and there's a lot of a space push, of course, with NASA, but also occult symbolism. Even the Saturn V, Apollo, they're calling back to these old gods and mythology in everything that they do.
Yeah, they are. That actually, that the two red lines that cut through the NASA. I'm gonna try to find an image of it here. The two red lines that cut through the NASA logo are actually a snake's serpent. There's a whole
Mm-hmm.
teaching on that where, and I'm going to pull up a picture here real quick of this as well because it's really pretty shocking. But yeah, so it's odd that you would bring that up about him being friends with Werner von Braun, because there are a lot of people. I'm not sure if you're in this camp or not, but there are a lot of people that are flat earthers that talk about how Disney normalized the idea of outer space because of his relationship with Werner von Braun and the attempt to deceive the nations and deceive children, especially, that there was actually some type of outer space or something like that.
Or
Uh,
aliens.
yeah, or aliens, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty
I'm
fascinating.
totally on the flat earth. And I might split the audience with that, but I have done a lot of research on it personally, and I lean more towards the flat earth model. It just makes sense to me, especially with all the other occult symbolism surrounding NASA.
Right. Right. And I am also, as some of the listeners have found out, I did a couple interviews. I did one with David Weiss, Flat Earth Dave, and I did one
Mm-hmm.
with Mark Sargent as well. And I've got two other ones that are coming up here in the next few weeks, and I'm working on getting them on the shows as well to talk about that stuff, because it's this things right here, like this is in plain sight. And I want to try to find the one that actually has the connection between the serpent's tongue and what the NASA symbol is. But people don't realize also that when you look at something like Disney was a Freemason. That's why there's the Club 33 and the $10,000 and the like 17-year waiting list to get into that place.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very passionate about secret societies and the occult the occult influence of that, and then all of those things in the Disney cartoons. Like we've seen it, the famous when I think it was when Donald Duck was in the doctor's office, in the back, the eye chart behind him
Right.
said, "Ask about the Illuminati."
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, yes, I can. And also, I think that the reason there are Disney cruises is because cruise lines work on maritime law. as well. So it's much like an Epstein Island kind of a thing. Oh,
Huh.
your kid disappeared while you were on a Disney cruise. Oh, our bad.
Oh,
What's happening to
oh
the
man.
kids? But so going back to the cartoons, I was born in 94, so I missed a lot of those old cartoons. But what I didn't miss was the Disney princess movies. That's kind of how I started into all of it. So I can talk more about the,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
like Snow White, Alice in Wonderland. I've done a lot of research on those two movies specifically.
Okay, well
And
let's do it.
yeah, so I probably the first Disney movie I ever watched was Snow White, and I was obsessed with it. All kids are, and then maybe Cinderella, and then what's some older ones besides Cinderella?
Sleeping Beauty.
Like Beauty and the Beast, stuff like that. Alice in
Mhm.
Wonderland, and they have this recurring theme: Snow White and Alice in Wonderland in particular, and Pinocchio, where there's this fantastical sense to the disassociation of the main character. And we also see that in movies like Wizard of Oz, where there's a main character, but they kind of get swept away into a dreamlike state.
Hmm.
And even in Peter Pan, it's normal kids in a normal house with normal lives, but this figure shows up and they kind of take them away into this fantasy land. And there's something that's a neurological condition. It's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, and it essentially makes you see distorted images. Your body looks distorted. You see small animals, and you think that deers and ducks and all kinds of different animals are talking to you. It's kind of like schizophrenia in a way. And they call it Alice in Wonderland syndrome because, of course, Alice goes down the rabbit hole and she ends up in this fantastical world. And the reason that is repeated so often throughout these fantasy movies and cartoons is because they use movies like that to program small children, um, regular children, and children that are used for projects. And some people may be familiar with SRA, Satanic Ritual Abuse.
Right.
And in the programs, when they're abusing the children, they have them watch movies like Snow White. They have them watch movies like Alice in Wonderland. They have them watch movies like Pinocchio, Peter Pan. And it's almost training the child's mind that it's okay to disassociate, to go into a happy place, quote unquote, while there is something else going on in the physical world. And while on the surface level, it may look like it's just a cartoon, it's so much deeper than that. And that's where you have to look for the symbolism. Even with um, the Smurfs and some of the cartoons you were mentioning earlier, it's about black magic. How can we get kids interested in black magic? How can we normalize black magic? Well, let's put it in a kids show and we'll put little blue people casting spells, and it's funny and it's fun
And cute. Yeah.
and cute. Yeah. Until it's not.
And they make it acceptable because with Gargamel, he drew the pentagram on the ground and did casting spells and such. There was the black magic, and they always kind of put this dichotomy out there too. When they make it, well, there's black magic and dark magic, but then there's white magic and there's good magic and there's good wizards and good spells. And I know when you start to talk about this, there are all kinds of movies that pop up that are really great movies like the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Those movies that had, Christian authors that were writing these books as entertainment, as fantastical books and fantasy books. But the majority of those cartoons and the television shows that we're watching always have some kind of message, it seems, behind that. I know you were talking about there about the dissociative thing. I know Fritz Springmeier has written a lot about that. Those folks that were part of MK Ultra trying to break their personality, like you see a lot of times in the Freemasonic Lodge, where they have the black and white checkered floors. It's a symbol of duality. The two the two different colored eyes. You also have that in
Yes.
cartoons, and that's also talking about dissociative personality disorder. Now, are you? Do they do that so that that they can create a sex slave who can then go into that other personality or that dreamlike state so that they can endure the abuse for a long time? Or did they do that as a way to kind of use it like as a Manchurian candidate to control their brain at any time that they want to, or both?
I think both. It
Okay.
just depends on what they want to use that specific kid for. Because you have to think there are levels and rankings to the families and their children. So you might have some real upper echelon, real sickos who are willing to put their kid in the program for some more
Yeah.
important work. So they may be the Manchurian candidate, someone that they could use to maybe be a public figure one day, and their family has a pedigree that would support that. But then you have lower ranking families who are just kind of initiates into the cult, but they can still use their kids. So what are those kids going to be used for? Well, those are going to be your SRA, sex slave victims, the real torture disassociative kids. Those are the ones that grow up and they become son of Sam. Those are the ones that grow up and become Jeffrey Dahmers. And they use a lot of these same tactics in the military, which, when you look at serial killers, 60 to 70% of all serial killers were in the Army or the Air Force or some type of military
No way.
before they became serial killers.
Wow. That's amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
there's okay. So they, well, I guess, in a lot of times, and narcissists use this as well. They kind of break somebody's will, and they break them down, I guess, through the extreme training that they do, and then they just break down their will to be able to be an individual. And at that point, I guess, when they break them down, they now become susceptible. Their minds are able to be molded into what they want them to be, killers or special
Mm-hmm.
ops, things like that. And not everybody, that doesn't happen to everybody, of course. But it seems like those folks who almost can't take it, I guess, end up being the serial killers, or are they programmed
Yeah,
to become a serial killer?
I think that they're programmed. I think a lot of them are homegrown,
Okay.
which is why I've watched a lot of documentaries on serial killers that were just as gruesome as Ted Bundy, but they don't really get a lot of the spotlight. And you almost have to ask yourself, well, why are certain serial killers infamous? We all know Jack the Ripper. We all know Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Berkowitz. We all know these guys, and Richard Ramirez. But what about like the hundreds of other serial killers who have done just as bad that nobody ever makes a documentary about? Maybe you might find one and it's like, whoa, I didn't even know that guy even existed.
Yeah.
They like to put their homegrown serial killers in the spotlight because it breeds fear in people, insecurity in people. You can't trust anyone. You don't want to go out of your house past a certain time. I mean, when Richard Ramirez or Ted Bundy was on the loose, people were freaked out. Zodiac killer. They
Yeah.
didn't want to leave their homes. So these are homegrown serial killers. They chose these people, probably from military programs. They put them through whatever it was that they needed to do to them. And even splitting off a personality, I always say, they might not even be aware of the personality that takes over when they become Ted Bundy. A lot of people who knew these guys would say they were great with kids, blended into society. You'd never think anything of them. But in the same breath, they were the shark from Jaws. So how is this possible? It's just another fragmenting of someone's personality, and they've perfected it. They have it down to a science. You would think, oh, well, that would take years and years. It could take as little as 24 hours to do that to someone, because
Really?
if you watched movies like Clockwork Orange,
Yeah.
they've got it down to a science, people. I mean, they just flash lights in your face, they give you some hallucinogens, and then they just put that program, they slip it right in there, and then send you on your way.
I wonder if that was because when television first came out, it was they had that high flicker rate on there as well. So you had now my wife and I noticed this a long time ago. How back in the day, television shows, movies, cartoons, you would have a scene, and that scene would last for 5 minutes, almost 10 minutes, where it's in one scene, like one kitchen or one living room, and then the cartoon started becoming all the characters. Obviously, it's cartoon, but the characters started becoming even more distorted, where they looked
Mm-hmm.
humans looked
Mm-hmm.
like cartoon characters, just weird kind of shapes and weird the types of faces, etc. And then the flicker rate on the television, and then the very quick snapshots between one picture and another picture, and one scene and another scene, almost like they're trying to control your attention span, your
Yeah.
focus, your ability to focus on things for long term. And then of course, the dialogue became fart jokes and booger jokes and all that stuff, and poop and everything. I mean, it really degraded. There was a lot of
Yeah.
intelligent comedy, and then it really degraded. And of course, we
Mm-hmm.
know there's always been like that slapstick stuff, but even Monty Python was still intelligent humor.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Mm-hmm.
seemed like they were trying to use that as well to program folks. And I've always wondered this as well. So, like, we have a couple of stars. We've got just yeah, we had a break coming up here. But I notice a lot of these pop stars, people like Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, and Britney Spears. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately. Is that part of this as well? Do they use those child actors like that, and then the singers and the pop stars? Why do Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears snap? Why did they do that stuff?
Well, you're talking about three people who were in the Mickey Mouse Club.
Right. Yeah.
So it starts very young. The programming of these kids starts very young. And their parents have agreed to this in some form or capacity. They've agreed to this. And now look at them.
Yeah.
Brittany said that she shaved her head because she was tired of them plugging things into it.
What?
So there is even interviews of her where she doesn't blink for a very long period of time. There's interviews of Barbara Bush not blinking for long periods of time. And it's just all, and the speech pattern too. Sometimes Brittany just sounded like something else was coming out of her. Like she sounded almost like a robot at some points in interviews, or that they had given her like an injection or something. She was just like talking like 16 words a second. And you have to think, these poor kids grew up like this, and they probably didn't really have much of an option.
So I'm thinking new parents, of course, would sell their kids, and that's heartbreaking. You think about the Illuminati folks, the people who are part of the bloodlines who save their kids for certain things, or the parents that would sell their kids out for contracts like they did with Britney Spears and that whole conservatorship issue that they were facing and that she was facing, trying to get that back from her father. To think, I mean, I have kids, and to think that a parent would purposely sell their kid just so they can have some fame, some fortune, some money, some notoriety, sexualize their child so that they can be, viewed and lusted after by perverted men around the world. That's absolutely heartbreaking to me. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking to Cosmic Peach. Can I call you Julia? Is that okay?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Julia, the Cosmic Peach, right here on Breakdown Paranormal Files. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about this and more, and probably bring up a picture that Julia and I were talking about before the show that's heartbreaking because it's one of our favorite movies and TV series. Well, almost TV series. So keep it locked in right here on the Breakdown, folks. We will be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Breakdown Paranormal Files, everybody. Thanks for joining us right here on Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com. Go over to breakdradio.com as well. You can leave your sound off there by simply clicking on the microphone in the bottom right-hand corner, and you'll be able to leave a question for our guest or for me, and I'll get back to you with the answer to that, or a semi-answer. I don't know. I'll give you an answer. It might be wrong. But I'll still give you an answer to that. So you can leave that there, and we'll get that over to Julia to talk about that and to answer it for you. But look, so we've been talking about, just kind of, a little bit of a bird's eye view, like a 30,000 foot view of everything that's going on. We talk about programming in cartoons, the new age occultic influence in cartoons. We've been talking about the sexualization of children, the satanic ritual abuse which occurs, and it kind of begs a question here, Julia. Why are they? I mean, well, I guess we answered that kind of at the beginning, but why? Again, kind of reiterate for us, why are they doing this to our children?
Because they work on inversion, and they work on these ancient religions from Babylon, going back to the Canaanites and Baal worshiping and the depravity. They work on these principles. So it would be like for someone normal like you and I, we would go to church on Sunday. Maybe that Sunday you're doing communion. Maybe that Sunday somebody's getting baptized. Then you take your family and you all go to Golden Corral afterwards. And then you go home and watch a movie, whatever it is you do when you get home.
Right.
This is normal for them. This is their religion. They're working off of these ancient religions from Babylon, and even before that, the Sumerians and the Canaanites. They all were blood drinking, sacrifice your babies, channeling this disembodied spirits of these demons and devils and fallen angels. And if you think that it's changed just because it's 2023, you'd be sorely mistaken. It's gotten worse and more obvious, actually.
Gosh. And and just so you know, this is another image that I was talking about right before we went to break. And this is one of the ones I wanted to share that we were talking about before the show. And that is this one right here. Now, this is an image from the Santa Claus movie series. I'm sorry, television series. So you had the Santa Claus 2, the Santa Claus 3. We were talking about that. And some of my absolute favorite movies. Well, they decided to make a series out of this. And here there's a portion of the show, as you can see if you're watching, where the elves have made a surprise for Santa, and they hold up these signs, and these signs say, "We love you, Satan." Now it's supposed to be Santa, but they put Satan on there, and the people are like, "Well, it's just a joke. It's just humorous and all that." I don't know. I think it's a little inappropriate, especially for kids, and then especially with all the things that are going on with the accusations against Disney for doing things like this.
Exactly. That's my main argument is, if this wasn't Disney, you might think, well, that's just some funny little thing that they put in there. But because it's coming from Disney, and there was a lot of woke type of narrative and agenda going on with the Disney Plus app, or wherever you're watching it, on your phone, on your TV, this is just yet another example of the overall message that they're trying to portray. And it's not even just Disney, it's Paramount. Of course, if you know anything about Paramount, it is the symbolism for Paramount, the mountain with the stars overarching it.
Yeah.
Is Mount Hermon, where the fallen angels descended down on in the Bible. Now, why would they choose this? Well, because they like to show you the black magic imagery before you watch their program. It's always by design. And the more I learn about Babylon and the Canaanites and some of like the Aztecs, it always goes back to human sacrifice, sacrificing your children, cannibalism, and bloodletting for the gods. and it has not changed at all. They just can't do it in public arenas like they used to. But it just looks a little bit differently, so they can get away with it now, but it hasn't ever stopped.
Right. You know, that's interesting. I was actually bringing that up to somebody the other day. We were having a conversation and he was talking. I mean, pretty much I kind of had a misconception. I thought he was a Christian that was also a psychic medium, and I was going to have him on to talk about how he reconciles that with the Bible. We'll come to find out he doesn't believe the Bible to be legit at all.
Oh.
Found that out during the show, which was, you know, my fault. I'm not blaming that guy. He's actually, you know, an interesting guest. But we were talking about that and the accusation that God killed nations and just committed genocide and killed thousands of people. People also don't realize that the reason God sent the children of Israel into Canaan to destroy that land, and He gave them that land to possess, is because the people that were living in Canaan were doing exactly what you were talking about. They were sacrificing their living babies on the burning hands of an idol Moloch. They would throw their babies into this fire and burn him for that. And they were, I mean, that's enough to wipe out a nation of people if they're sacrificing their children to unknown gods like that. And we have that translated here to today, where rather than sacrificing babies on the altar of Moloch, they're sacrificing babies on the altar of careers or money or anything. You know, that's a little off topic there. But that whole thing you're talking about there with Mount Hermon and the angels that came down and taught the dark arts to man, and they intermingled their blood and they created the chimeras. And then, you know, we look at all the mythical animals and creatures that we have that came from that unity between those. The sexual intercourse between the fallen angels and man that produced the Nephilim. I mean, it's amazing how all of this always goes back to like the Middle East, Egypt, but especially it's all accounted for in the scriptures.
Yeah, and I think my screen is frozen, but can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you just fine.
I did a series on my podcast about the Nephilim and how they were the gods of old that these ancient religions were worshiping, because they're fallen angels. They may be mystical and angels, but they had the fallen side of them. So they wanted to pervert every piece of God's creation. And they went around proclaiming to be gods among men, and they did have these angelic type of supernatural abilities because they're angels. So people would, you know, drop down on their knees and worship them because they thought, these are gods. Wow, look what they can do. And the gods that we see in Egypt and in Mexico with the Aztecs and all of these ancient religions, Anunnaki, they were worshiping fallen angels. And when God sent the flood, it wasn't because He was being spiteful for no reason. He wanted to essentially wipe the slate clean. And I think that there were still pockets of rebellion after the flood, and that there were flesh and blood biological descendants of these Nephilim on earth that continued to reproduce. And we now have these bloodline descendants being our elite class in today, royal families and so on and so forth. And they are the ones running these secret programs. And you would ask yourself, well, why would they, you know, still be practicing this and that? Well, they're practicing the religion of their forefathers and their fathers before them and their fathers before them. And they believe that they have power in their blood because they are descended from the fallen ones.
And what's I don't want to say funny, but what's interesting is that Satan continues to fight and war in that way, even though he knows he's, you know, obviously seen the Bible and he knows what the end says. He just doesn't believe God, and he thinks he's still going to win. You know, I used to think one of my biggest roadblocks to that, what you were talking about there, is the Nephilim, and then the creation of between the fallen angels and human women. I used to think, well, the flood would have destroyed them. Where would that have happened? But it's interesting that in chapter 6 of Genesis, God says the same thing about man's heart. He says that God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So then he wipes
Mhm.
out the world in a flood. But then if we fast forward to chapter 9, he says the exact same thing about man as well. That even though he's establishing his covenant with them, that man is still evil and their hearts are still evil and they're still wicked. Because we're born that way, and anybody that is born that way, the descendants of a human being are going to have that proclivity to evil. So that's definitely there. I mean, and it's interesting. Again, all of this stuff kind of goes back to that Baal worship, Moloch worship, and then the Eastern mysticism and such. Let me ask you this, because we've got about 12 minutes here left on the show for tonight. I'd love to have you back on. I'm free. It
Mhm.
seems like I'm doing a lot of 101 type shows on this. Like we did the shows with Mark Sargent and David Weiss, and I'm going to have them back on because it's just like an introduction to the audience and almost like an introduction to me in ways on some of the topics. So I love having these conversations that are really just intros into the larger conversation. Let me ask you this. Was Walt Disney a pedophile?
I think he admired it, but we can't find anything specifically to link him back to a victim while he could have had several victims. God only knows. I think that he helped pedophiles. So maybe guilt by association, if you surround yourself with pedophiles and you're very admiring of what they're doing, would that pretty much make you a pedophile at that point? Like, if I
At
knew
least an
something like that
accessory.
was going on, I would do everything in my power to stop it,
Right.
not encourage it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
And it's really odd because over the past, it's probably 10 years or so, 10 or 15 years, the amount of people that have been arrested that were Disney workers that worked in the park with children that were downloading child porn on company computers and company
Right.
who
Right.
were convicted pedophiles who were trying to meet with documented trying to meet with young boys and young girls to have
Mm-hmm.
sex. And I mean, we're talking like oodles of these folks that worked for Disney. But I mean, if it happened at Universal or if it was happening at Legoland or somewhere else, you better believe they would make sure that that's plastered all over the place. But it seems like Disney just the Disney theme parks are just like this collection of pedophiles that work there.
Oh, yeah. And birds of a feather, right?
Yeah.
Flock together. And they feel safe doing that there because look who created it. We have Walt Disney. He was, things aren't as well documented from back then as they are now.
Yeah.
So who's to say, really?
Yeah. So there's no evidence because I've always heard that, and I've searched for it because I've heard this stuff about Tom Hanks. I know, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. The joke with him is that he won't date any girl over 25. I've heard about, of course, Walt Disney. So I'm trying to figure out, and I've studied and researched this, but I've never been able to find any evidence of this between the pedophile connection. Now, I can look at the over sexualization in the movies, like you can see where sex is written in the cloud on the Lion King, or you see the bishop in Little Mermaid getting an erection,
Right.
or the
Hmm.
erect the large phallus that was drawn on the front cover, which I've got, by the way. I wish I could find
Hmm.
that here, but I've got the Disney Little Mermaid where it's got the Trident's castle, and it's there's a phallus that's drawn on the front of it. You can't deny that's what it is. So I
Well,
see the
yeah,
oversimplification there.
because if you like something, then you're probably going to make cartoons about it. So if I really loved, I don't know, painting or ballet or something like that, and I wanted to make a kids show about a child paint prodigy or child ballet prodigy, that's probably some stuff I would include in there. But if I was obsessed with pedophilia, you get Pinocchio. That, I mean, it's just the mind of the artist comes through in the work. So when you look at some of the art pieces that, what are their names? The Podestas have,
Oh my gosh.
tell me that's something you want in your house.
Well, Jamie Lee Curtis even had that one recently with hanging behind her. Did you see? I'm sure you saw that. Where
In
it was
her
a young,
dining room or
yeah,
wherever it was.
it
Yeah.
was a young child. I'm pretty sure the child was nude and was shoved into a plastic tote. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who wants that
Mm-hmm.
on their wall? Who looks at that and goes, "Oh, that's art"? No, that's that's child porn.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. That, and so that's why I say maybe we can't find a body count, but of course it's very well hidden, and they probably were using some type of like orphan train or something, these kids that nobody knew anything about to do this stuff with.
mm-mm.
But you have to look at the art and go, what was this person thinking? What did they have in mind while creating this? And you're seeing, erect penises and over sexual tones in all of the cartoons,
Yeah.
and outright symbolism for gods of old. It's Hercules and Poseidon in The Little Mermaid, and these were the fallen ones that these ancient cultures worshipped.
Oh, you know what? I've never thought about that.
Of
These demigods.
course.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Julia, because I never made that connection with it too, because you know that these demigods, of course, in the mythological of gods like you were talking about, were just fallen angels that had these powers that were residual from their bloodline, from their
Absolutely.
forefathers. But writing all of this mythology about Hercules and about Triton and about those different gods, oh, I never thought
Hmm.
about it like that.
Of
That's one of
course
the
he's going to
great.
put that in there. Of
Yeah.
course he is. And even with Cinderella, you have the fairy godmother, and the fairy bloodline is the matriarchal Nephilim bloodline. So you see fairies all over Disney's work. You see dragons, which were the patriarchal Nephilim bloodline in all of the Disney movies. So we have the fairies represented, we have the dragons represented, we have the gods of old represented, and then right in the background is a big erect penis. So you tell me what the mind was behind the person who put this into action.
Well, certainly very excited, I'm sure, when they were drawing that.
Right.
Well, so let me ask you this in the last few minutes here. What is it about Pinocchio that, because you brought Pinocchio up here, what is it about Pinocchio?
Well, the Geppetto, the father of the creator, the woodworker, whatever he was, of Pinocchio, he wanted a real boy. He didn't want a fake, you know, sex doll, quote unquote. He wanted a real boy. And so he made a wish, and magically Pinocchio was turned into a real boy, quote unquote, that could talk and walk around and interact. But Pinocchio gets trapped and was taken to Pleasure Island, where all the naughty little boys go. And once you go, you never come back the same. And think about what I just said and ask yourself if that's something you want your 5-year-old watching.
Hmm. Oh, I can see where you're going with that.
And the live action Pinocchio, Geppetto was Tom Hanks. So again, tell me that this stuff is not connected.
Hmm. What about Monsters Inc? That's got to be one of my favorites. What about Monsters Inc? You know
Monsters
about
Inc.
that
is
one?
very interesting because they survive on the fear of children, and they basically power up by terrorizing children. And yeah, it has a happy ending. They realize they can make more energy if they make them laugh, but Disney movies usually make kids laugh. So if you put a kid, if you're trying to groom a child, you might put a Disney movie on for them. It's just very sinister in my mind what they're trying to portray with Monsters Inc., especially since one of the kids in Monsters Inc. that couldn't get scared. They were like, oh my God, he won't get scared. And you look in the room and it's the kids' room from Toy Story, also with Tom Hanks. So everything's interwoven. They're telling a much larger story in small pieces, in my opinion.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, we just got a couple minutes left here on the show. How can the listeners find you? Where can they go to get more information about you?
Thank you for asking. Yes, so I am Julia. I have the Cosmic Peach podcast, and it's available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I would love for any of the listeners to come and find me and check out my work and have your mind blown.
Have your mind blown. Awesome. So it's just the just Cosmic Peach podcast, and you're on Instagram as well. That's where we connected over there. So people can find you there also. So what is one of the most intriguing or freakiest things that you've learned since you have been studying all of this? I mean, I understand that, with all of the Disney Discovery and all that, but what's the one thing you sat back and you were like, I can't believe that's real. That's unbelievable.
I did probably 30 episodes digging into conspiracy theories, asking myself why, and then the Nephilim connection fell into my lap, and I got to digging into the Nephilim and that they're still around today and what their role has been since the beginning of time, even with Adam and Eve. And then you realize that all conspiracies lead you back to Jesus, and that's what people really need. That's the real truth. And how can I get this out to people?
Isn't that the truth? I mean, all of these things have a spiritual connection. All of these things can be traced, not because the Bible started them, but because the Bible's been documenting these things for years, and the Bible, through God's inspiration, has been proving to us time and time again that Christ is the answer. That it's not the Nephilim, it's not the pathway of Satan, it's not the broad path that's easy, it's the narrow path that is difficult and constantly being shown to us. It's amazing how true the Bible has been proven all of these years later.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny that you can use conspiracy theories to bring people to God because they realize everything is connected. And they just don't understand how that could possibly be, or why these people are so devilish, or why people are so evil. And then you have to remember that if these people are that devilish and that evil, then there must also be the opposite of that, which is God, Jesus, and the light path. So that's what brings people to the truth.
Amen. There's a lot of things that happen that draw people to Christ like that, because there are, like you said, if there is that immense evil that exists, there has to be a God that exists as well, the good. You can't have evil without good, and you can't have so people that see that, it points them to Christ, and very, very important and very fruitful work. All right, Julia, thanks again for coming on. If you don't mind hanging on, we'll say a proper goodbye, but thanks again for coming on. Cosmic Peach Podcast, folks, is the name. You can head on over to YouTube and find her there, and subscribe to that channel as well. I'm a subscriber, so if I'm a subscriber, you should be a subscriber. So awesome, Julia. Well, thanks again for coming on, and we'll have you on again in the future. Okay. Thank you so much. It was great. Absolutely. All right. We'll see you in just a second. All right, everybody. There you have it. Julia, from the Cosmic Peach Podcast, laying down some truth, some hard truth, some disgusting truth, but some important truth for all of us to know. All right, folks, if you want to get more of the breakdown, go to breakdradio.com. Also go to Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com, and you can download the app and take all the fantastic paranormal shows with you there. Don't forget to check out the show tomorrow as well on Saturday at 9 a.m. And until next time, make Christ supremely valuable.